The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Aldermore as Kate hurried through the marketplace, her worn leather boots clicking against the wet stones. She pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to ward off the early autumn chill that seemed to seep through her simple brown dress. The merchants were already setting up their stalls, their voices calling out prices for bread, vegetables, and trinkets that most people in the lower quarter could barely afford. Kate worked as a seamstress in Madame Eleanor's shop, a small establishment tucked between a bakery and a blacksmith's forge. The work was honest but paid little, barely enough to keep food on the table and a roof over her head in the cramped room she shared with two other girls above the shop. At 19, she had learned to be grateful for what she had, even if it wasn't much. As she walked, Kate's fingers unconsciously moved to touch the delicate chain around her neck. Hidden beneath her dress lay a necklace that had been her most treasured possession since childhood. It was the only thing she had left of her mother, who had died when Kate was just 7 years old. The necklace was unlike anything else Kate owned, made of the finest silver with an intricate pendant that caught the light in the most beautiful way. Sometimes, late at night, she would take it out and hold it up to the candlelight, watching the way it sparkled and wondering about the mother she could barely remember. Her father had given her the necklace on her mother's deathbed, whispering that it had belonged to her mother's family and that she should keep it safe always. He had made her promise never to show it to anyone, never to wear it where others could see. "It's too fine for people like us," he had said with tears in his eyes. "People might ask questions we can't answer." Kate had kept that promise faithfully for 12 years, wearing the necklace only beneath her clothes, close to her heart. The marketplace was busier than usual this morning. Word had spread that Prince Alexander would be passing through the town on his way to the northern provinces. The royal caravan wasn't expected until afternoon, but already people were gathering along the main road, hoping to catch a glimpse of the prince who would one day be their king. Children ran between the stalls, their eyes bright with excitement, while their mothers scolded them for getting underfoot. Kate had no time for such things. She had work to do, and Madame Eleanor was not a patient woman when it came to tardiness. The elderly seamstress ran her shop with an iron fist, demanding perfection from her workers and showing little tolerance for mistakes or delays. Kate had learned long ago that keeping her head down and working hard was the best way to avoid the sharp edge of her employer's tongue. She pushed through the crowd, dodging a boy chasing a chicken that had escaped from its cage, and nearly collided with a group of women discussing the prince's visit in hushed, excited tones. One of them, a baker's wife known for her gossip, was telling the others about how handsome the prince was said to be, and how he was still unmarried at 25. "They say he's looking for a wife," the woman whispered conspiratorially. "A princess from a neighboring kingdom, of course. Someone worthy of the crown." Kate couldn't help but smile at the woman's romantic notions. Princes didn't marry seamstresses, and she had long ago given up any girlish dreams of fairy tale endings. Her life was real and practical, filled with needles and thread, difficult customers, and the constant worry about having enough money to survive another month. The bell above Madame Eleanor's door chimed as Kate entered the shop. The familiar smell of fabric and lavender sachets greeted her, along with the sight of her employer already bent over her work table, examining a piece of emerald silk with a critical eye. "You're late," Madame Eleanor said without looking up. "Only by a few minutes," Kate replied, hanging her shawl on a peg by the door. "The marketplace is crowded because of the prince's visit." Madame Eleanor snorted. "Foolish people, wasting time gawking at someone they'll never meet. We have work to do. Mrs. Thornberry wants her daughter's wedding dress finished by tomorrow, and the embroidery on the sleeves is still incomplete." Kate nodded and moved to her own workstation, where yards of ivory silk waited for her attention. The wedding dress was indeed beautiful, probably the finest piece they had worked on all year. Mrs. Thornberry was the wife of a successful merchant, one of the wealthier residents of Aldermore, and she had spared no expense for her daughter's wedding to the mayor's son. As Kate worked, her fingers flying over the delicate embroidery, she found her mind wandering to thoughts of her mother. She wondered what her mother's wedding dress had looked like, whether she had been happy on her wedding day. Kate's father rarely spoke of those times, and, when he did, his eyes would grow distant and sad. He had never remarried, never even seemed interested in finding another wife, as if all his capacity for love had died with Kate's mother. The morning passed quickly as Kate lost herself in the rhythm of her work. The tiny stitches required complete concentration, and she had learned to find peace in the repetitive motions of the needle. It was meditative in a way, helping her forget about her empty stomach and the ache in her back from hunching over the embroidery. Around midday, the sound of trumpets echoed through the town, announcing the arrival of the royal caravan. The noise from the street grew louder as people rushed to get a better view of the procession. Even Madame Eleanor seemed distracted, glancing toward the window every few minutes. "Perhaps we should close the shop for an hour," Kate suggested tentatively. "Everyone else seems to be watching the parade." Madame Eleanor considered this for a moment, clearly torn between her desire to see the prince and her dedication to work. Finally, her curiosity won out. "Very well," she said, setting down her scissors. "But only for an hour. We'll lock up and watch from the street, then come right back to work." They closed the shop and joined the crowd that had gathered along the main thoroughfare. Kate found herself squeezed between a fishmonger and a group of excited young women, all craning their necks to see over the people in front of them. The sound of hoofbeats grew closer, accompanied by the jingle of harnesses and the creak of wagon wheels. The royal guard appeared first, 20 mounted soldiers in gleaming armor riding in perfect formation. Their horses were magnificent beasts, clearly bred for both beauty and strength, and their riders sat with the kind of straight-backed pride that came from years of military training. Behind them came the prince's carriage, an elaborate affair painted in royal blue and gold, with the kingdom's coat of arms emblazoned on its sides. The crowd cheered as the carriage passed, and Kate caught a brief glimpse of Prince Alexander through the window. He was indeed handsome, with dark hair and strong features, and he waved graciously to the people lining the street. For just a moment, his eyes seemed to meet hers across the crowd, and Kate felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. But it was what happened next that changed everything. As Kate turned to follow the carriage with her eyes, someone in the crowd jostled against her roughly. She stumbled, her hand instinctively going to her throat to steady herself. To her horror, she felt the clasp of her necklace give way under the pressure of the sudden movement. The precious chain slipped from her neck and disappeared into the churning mass of people at her feet. "No," she cried out, dropping to her knees on the dirty cobblestones. She pushed through the legs of the crowd, desperately searching for any glint of silver among the mud and debris. Panic rose in her chest as she realized how impossible it would be to find such a small object in this chaos. The crowd was beginning to disperse as the royal caravan moved on, but Kate remained on the ground, her hands frantically searching through the dirt and stones. Tears of frustration and fear began to blur her vision. The necklace wasn't just jewelry to her, it was her only connection to her mother, the one beautiful thing in her simple life. Looking for something? Kate looked up to see a young man in the uniform of the royal guard standing over her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with kind brown eyes and sandy hair visible beneath his helmet. In his gloved hand, he held her necklace, the silver chain glinting in the afternoon sunlight. "Oh, thank you," Kate breathed, scrambling to her feet. She reached for the necklace, but the guard didn't immediately hand it over. Instead, he studied it with a strange expression, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This is an unusual piece," he said slowly. "The craftsmanship is exquisite. Not the sort of thing you'd expect to find in a market town like this." Kate felt a chill of fear run down her spine. She thought of her father's warnings, his insistence that she keep the necklace hidden. "It belonged to my mother," she said carefully. "It's all I have left of her." The guard's eyes moved from the necklace to Kate's face, and she saw something shift in his expression. "Your mother, what was her name?" "Anna," Kate replied, wondering why he was asking such personal questions. "Anna Mills." The guard was quiet for a long moment, still studying both Kate and the necklace. Other members of the royal guard had noticed their conversation and were beginning to approach, their own expressions curious and alert. "Mills," the guard repeated thoughtfully. "And your father?" "Thomas Mills. He's a carpenter." Kate's voice was barely above a whisper now. Something about the way the guard was looking at her made her deeply uncomfortable, as if he was seeing something she couldn't understand. One of the approaching guards, an older man with silver hair and captain stripes on his uniform, reached them and immediately noticed the necklace in his subordinate's hand. Kate saw his eyes widen with what looked like recognition, and her heart began to pound with genuine fear. "Where did you get this?" the captain demanded, his voice sharp with authority. It's mine, Kate said, trying to keep her voice steady. It belonged to my mother. The captain stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the necklace. Do you know what this is, girl? Kate shook her head, not trusting her voice to remain steady. This, the captain said, holding up the necklace so that the pendant caught the light, is the lost pendant of House Ravencrest. It belonged to Princess Isabella, who disappeared 20 years ago. The words hit Kate like a physical blow. She stared at the captain in shock, unable to process what he was saying. That's impossible, she whispered. My mother wasn't a princess. She was just my mother. But, even as she said the words, memories began flooding back. Her mother's refined way of speaking, so different from other women in their neighborhood. The way she had known how to read and write when most people couldn't. The sadness that had always seemed to surround her, as if she was mourning for something more than just a simple life. The captain gestured to two of his men. Escort Miss Mills to the prince's carriage. His Highness will want to hear about this immediately. No, Kate said, backing away. There's been some mistake. I'm nobody special. I'm just a seamstress. But, the guards were already moving to either side of her, not roughly but, with the kind of gentle firmness that made it clear she had no choice in the matter. Kate looked around desperately for Madame Eleanor, but, her employer had already disappeared back into the crowd, probably returning to the shop and, wondering where Kate had gone. As they walked toward the royal carriage, which had stopped at the end of the street, Kate's mind raced with questions and fears. If what the captain said was true, if her mother really had been a princess, then, what did that make her? And, why had her parents kept such an enormous secret from her all these years? The carriage door opened as they approached, and Prince Alexander stepped out, his earlier gracious demeanor replaced by an expression of intense curiosity. He looked even more imposing up close, and Kate felt her knees grow weak as she realized she was about to come face to face with the future king. Your Highness, the captain said, bowing deeply. We've discovered something that requires your immediate attention. Prince Alexander's eyes moved to Kate, taking in her simple dress and frightened expression, before settling on the necklace that the captain still held. When he saw it, his entire demeanor changed, his face going pale with shock. Dear God, he whispered. Is that the Ravencrest pendant, Your Highness? This young woman claims it belonged to her mother. Prince Alexander reached out and took the necklace from the captain, holding it with the reverence one might show a religious relic. Anna, he said softly. Princess Isabella's real name was Anna. Kate felt the world spinning around her. How do you know that? She asked, her voice barely audible. The prince looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, part wonder, part sorrow, part something else entirely. Because Princess Isabella was my aunt. She disappeared when I was just a child, but I remember her. She was the kindest person I've ever known. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge that once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Kate stared at Prince Alexander, trying to reconcile the man standing before her with the fairy tale stories she had grown up hearing. If her mother had been his aunt, then, that meant. What does this mean? She whispered. Prince Alexander exchanged a meaningful look with the captain before answering. It means, Miss Mills, that you may not be who you think you are. And, it means that your life is about to change in ways you cannot possibly imagine. As the royal guard prepared to escort her to the carriage, Kate looked back at the marketplace where she had worked and lived for so long. Everything looked exactly the same vendors, the same buildings, the same cobblestone streets, but she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The simple life of Kate Mills, the seamstress, was ending before her very eyes, and whatever came next would be as mysterious and uncertain as the necklace that had started it all. The carriage door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Through the window, she watched the familiar streets of Aldermore slip away, carrying with them the only life she had ever known. The royal carriage moved with surprising smoothness along the winding road that led away from Aldermore toward the capital city of Ravenshollow. Kate sat stiffly on the plush velvet seat, acutely aware of how out of place she looked in her simple brown dress surrounded by such luxury. Prince Alexander sat across from her, occasionally glancing in her direction but seeming lost in his own thoughts. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions and revelations that neither seemed ready to address. Outside the window, the countryside rolled by in a blur of golden fields and distant hills. Kate had never traveled beyond the borders of Aldermore before, and, under different circumstances, she might have been excited to see new places. Instead, she felt as if she was being carried away from everything that defined her, everything that made sense in her world. "You're frightened," Prince Alexander observed quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for nearly an hour. Kate looked at him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "Wouldn't you be?" she asked, then, immediately worried that she had been too bold in speaking to him so directly. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I suppose I would be. I'm sorry for the abrupt way this happened. Captain Morrison can be rather intense when it comes to matters of royal security." "Is that what this is about? Security?" Kate asked. "I don't understand any of this. Yesterday I was a seamstress, and today I'm being told my mother was a princess. It feels like something from a children's story." Prince Alexander leaned forward slightly, his expression growing more serious. "I know it's overwhelming. When I was young, I used to hear stories about my Aunt Isabella. She was my father's younger sister, and, by all accounts, she was the light of the royal court. Beautiful, intelligent, kind to everyone regardless of their station in life." Kate listened intently, hungry for any information about the mother she barely remembered. "She was engaged to be married to a duke from a neighboring kingdom," the prince continued. "It was a political arrangement, as royal marriages usually are. But Isabella fell in love with someone else, a young scholar who worked in the royal library. When her father, my grandfather, discovered the relationship, he forbade it and moved up the wedding date." "What happened then?" Kate asked, though she suspected she already knew part of the answer. "She disappeared the night before her wedding. The entire kingdom searched for her, but it was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. There were rumors that she had been kidnapped, or that she had taken her own life rather than marry a man she didn't love. But no body was ever found, no ransom demands were made. Eventually, she was declared dead, and the kingdom mourned the loss of their beloved princess." Kate felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "She ran away. She chose love over duty." "It would seem so," Prince Alexander agreed. "And if the necklace truly belonged to her, then she found happiness for at least a little while." "You said your father's name was Thomas Mills?" "Yes. He's a carpenter. A good man, but quiet. He's always seemed so sad, like he was carrying some great burden." Kate paused, thinking of her father working in his small shop, the way his hands would shake sometimes when he thought no one was looking. "I think he loved her very much." "Thomas," the prince repeated thoughtfully. "Not a noble name, which means he wasn't the scholar she was supposed to have fallen in love with. Perhaps she found love again after leaving the palace." The carriage hit a bump in the road, jostling Kate from her thoughts. Through the window, she could see that they were approaching a small village, its thatched-roof cottages clustered around a central square. People stopped their daily activities to watch the royal carriage pass, bowing respectfully as they recognized the coat of arms emblazoned on its sides. "Where are you taking me?" Kate asked suddenly, realizing that she had never been told their destination. "To the palace in Raven's Hollow. My father, the king, will want to meet you. If you truly are Isabella's daughter, then you're his niece. Your family." The word family sent a shock through Kate's system. She had grown up with only her father, no aunts or uncles or grandparents that she knew of. The idea that she might have a whole family she had never known about was both thrilling and terrifying. "What if I'm not?" she asked quietly. "What if there's been some mistake?" Prince Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out the necklace, which he had been carrying since the captain had given it to him. The silver chain caught the afternoon light streaming through the carriage window, and Kate could see details in the pendant that she had never noticed before. There were tiny engravings around the edges, symbols that looked almost like a coat of arms. "This necklace was made specifically for Princess Isabella on her 16th birthday," he said. "It was commissioned from the finest jewelers in the kingdom, and there's only one like it in existence. The pendant bears the Ravencrest family crest, and see these small rubies around the edge? Each one represents a different virtue that the royal family holds dear: courage, wisdom, compassion, justice, and truth. Kate studied the necklace with new eyes, seeing it not as a simple keepsake from her mother but as a piece of royal history. "I never knew," she whispered. "I just thought it was pretty." "There's something else," Prince Alexander said, his voice taking on a more formal tone. "If you are indeed Isabella's daughter, then you're not just family. You have a legitimate claim to the throne." Kate's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What do you mean?" "The law of succession in our kingdom states that the crown passes to the eldest child of the monarch. If there is no direct heir, it passes to the next closest blood relative. My father has no other children besides myself, and Isabella was his only sibling. If she had a child, that child would be in line for the throne," Kate finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "After me, yes. You would be second in line to inherit the crown of Ravenshollow." Kate felt as if the carriage floor was dropping away beneath her feet. The idea was so absurd, so completely outside the realm of anything she had ever imagined, that she almost laughed. "But I don't know anything about being royal. I can barely read, I don't know how to dance or speak properly or any of the things a princess should know." "Those are things that can be taught," Prince Alexander said gently. "What matters is what's in your heart, what kind of person you are. And, from what I can see, you have the same kindness in your eyes that I remember in my aunt's." They rode in contemplative silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Kate tried to imagine what her life might become if she truly was a princess. Would she live in the palace? Would she have servants and fine dresses and all the luxury she had only ever heard about in stories? The idea was both appealing and frightening. She thought of her simple room above the seamstress shop, of Madame Eleanor wondering where she had gone, of her father coming home from work to find her missing. "My father," she said suddenly. "He'll be worried sick when I don't come home. He doesn't even know where I am." "We'll send word to him," Prince Alexander assured her. "Whatever happens, he'll be taken care of. If he truly was married to Princess Isabella, then he's family too, in his own way." As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change. The rolling farmland gave way to larger estates with grand manor houses visible in the distance. The road became wider and better maintained, paved with smooth stones instead of the rough dirt paths around Aldermore. They passed through several more villages, each one larger and more prosperous looking than the last. "We're entering the royal district," Prince Alexander explained as they passed between two enormous stone pillars topped with carved ravens, the symbol of the royal house. "Ravenshollow is just ahead." Kate pressed her face to the window and gasped at what she saw. The capital city spread out before them like something from a fairy tale. Tall spires and gleaming towers reached toward the sky, their banners fluttering in the breeze. The buildings were made of white stone that seemed to glow in the late afternoon light, and she could see bridges spanning a wide river that wound through the heart of the city. And there, rising above everything else, stood the royal palace. It was magnificent beyond anything Kate had ever imagined, with dozens of towers and turrets, vast courtyards, and walls that seemed to stretch on forever. Flags bearing the Ravencrest coat of arms flew from every tower, and, even from this distance, she could see guards patrolling the battlements. "It's beautiful," Kate breathed, unable to take her eyes away from the sight. "It's been the seat of the Ravencrest dynasty for over 300 years, Prince Alexander said with evident pride. "And, if we're right about who you are, it's your ancestral home as well." The carriage began its descent toward the city, winding down a road that offered spectacular views of the palace and the surrounding countryside. Kate noticed that there were other carriages and riders on the road, all traveling in the same direction. Nobles in fine clothing rode past on magnificent horses, their clothing rich with embroidery and jewels that caught the light. As they drew closer to the palace gates, Kate became increasingly aware of how inadequate her appearance was for such a setting. Her brown dress, which had seemed perfectly respectable in Aldermore, now looked shabby and peasant-like. Her hair, which she had braided simply that morning, felt wild and unkempt compared to the elaborate styles she glimpsed on the noble ladies they passed. "I don't belong here," she said quietly, more to herself than to Prince Alexander. He heard her anyway. "You have as much right to be here as anyone, perhaps more so. Royal blood doesn't make someone worthy, their actions do. And, from what I've observed of you today, you have the grace and dignity that true nobility requires. Kate looked at him in surprise. She had expected him to be arrogant and dismissive, the way nobles were portrayed in the stories she had heard. Instead, he seemed kind and thoughtful, genuinely concerned about her comfort and well-being. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she asked impulsively. Prince Alexander smiled, and, for a moment, he looked younger and less formal. "Because if you are Isabella's daughter, then you're family. And family takes care of each other, regardless of how they were raised or where they came from." The palace gates loomed ahead of them now, massive iron structures decorated with intricate scrollwork and the ever-present raven motifs. Guards in ceremonial armor stood at attention as the royal carriage approached, their spears glinting in the late afternoon sun. As they passed through the gates into the palace courtyard, Kate felt as if she was entering another world entirely. The courtyard was paved with marble and decorated with elaborate fountains and carefully tended gardens. Servants in royal livery hurried about their duties, and she could see other nobles arriving for what appeared to be some sort of evening gathering. The carriage came to a stop before the main entrance to the palace, a grand staircase flanked by columns and topped with an enormous arched doorway. Footmen immediately appeared to open the carriage door, and Prince Alexander stepped out first before turning to help Kate down. She hesitated for a moment at the carriage door, looking up at the imposing facade of the palace. Somewhere inside those walls was a king who might be her uncle, answers to questions she had never thought to ask, and a future she couldn't begin to imagine. "Ready?" Prince Alexander asked, offering his hand. Kate took a deep breath and placed her hand in his. "As ready as I'll ever be." As her feet touched the marble courtyard, Kate felt the last threads connecting her to her old life finally snap. Whatever happened next, wherever this incredible journey led, there would be no going back to the simple existence of Kate Mills, the seamstress. That girl had died the moment the necklace had fallen from her throat in the marketplace, and whoever she was becoming would have to learn to live in this strange new world of palaces and princes, secrets and revelations. The great doors of the palace stood open before her, and beyond them lay mysteries that would either destroy her simple understanding of herself or transform her into someone she had never dared to dream she could become. The interior of the royal palace was even more magnificent than Kate had imagined. As she walked beside Prince Alexander through corridors lined with portraits of long-dead kings and queens, her footsteps echoed off marble floors polished to mirror brightness. Tapestries depicting great battles and royal ceremonies hung from the walls between tall windows that let in streams of golden afternoon light. Everything spoke of centuries of power, wealth, and tradition. Servants bowed deeply as they passed, their curious eyes following Kate's simple figure with barely concealed interest. She could almost hear their whispered questions. Who was this plainly dressed young woman walking beside the prince? Why was she being escorted through the palace with such obvious importance? "The throne room is just ahead," Prince Alexander said quietly as they approached a set of enormous double doors guarded by 2 soldiers in ceremonial armor. "My father will be holding court until evening, but Captain Morrison sent word ahead about your arrival. We're expected." Kate's stomach churned with nervousness. In a few moments, she would be face to face with King Marcus himself, the ruler of the entire kingdom. What did one say to a king? How was she supposed to act? Her father had never taught her about royal protocol, probably never imagining that such knowledge would ever be necessary. The guards opened the doors with perfect synchronization, revealing the throne room in all its splendor. The vast hall stretched out before them, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadow high above. Columns carved with intricate designs supported galleries where courtiers watched the proceedings below. At the far end of the room, on a raised platform approached by a dozen marble steps, sat the throne itself. King Marcus was exactly what Kate had expected a king to look like. Tall and imposing even while seated, he wore robes of deep purple trimmed with gold, and a crown that caught the light from the massive chandeliers overhead. His hair was silver gray, and his face bore the lines of someone who had carried the weight of a kingdom for many years. But it was his eyes that struck Kate most. They were intelligent and penetrating, the kind of eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. The throne room was filled with courtiers and petitioners, nobles in elaborate dress conducting the daily business of the kingdom. As Prince Alexander and Kate entered, conversations died away and heads turned to stare at the unexpected pair. Kate felt hundreds of eyes upon her, judging her appearance, wondering about her identity. Your Majesty, Prince Alexander said, bowing deeply as they reached the base of the throne platform. I present Kate Mills of Aldermore. Kate quickly dropped into what she hoped was an appropriate curtsy, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. King Marcus studied her for a long moment without speaking. His gaze moved from her face to her simple dress, then to the necklace that Prince Alexander held out for him to see. When the king's eyes fell upon the pendant, Kate saw his entire demeanor change. His composed royal mask slipped for just an instant, revealing a flash of pain and something that might have been hope. Clear the room, the king commanded, his voice carrying easily through the vast hall. The courtiers began filing out through various doors, their whispered conversations buzzing with speculation about what they had just witnessed. Soon, only Kate, Prince Alexander, and a few trusted advisors remained in the enormous space. King Marcus rose from his throne and descended the steps slowly, his eyes never leaving Kate's face. As he drew closer, she could see the resemblance between him and Prince Alexander, the same strong jawline, the same intelligent eyes, though the king's were shadowed with years of responsibility and loss. Give me the necklace, he said quietly. Prince Alexander handed over the pendant, and the king held it with the same reverence Kate remembered seeing in her father's eyes whenever he had spoken of her mother. His hands, she noticed, were shaking slightly. Isabella, the king whispered, and Kate heard a lifetime of grief and regret in that single word. Your Majesty, Kate said hesitantly, Prince Alexander told me that Princess Isabella was your sister. But I still don't understand how my mother could have been. The king looked up at her sharply. What do you remember of your mother? Kate searched her memory for details that had seemed unimportant before but might now hold new meaning. She was beautiful. And kind. She used to sing to me songs I never heard anyone else sing. She could read and write, which seemed normal to me then, but now I realize most women in our village couldn't. She spoke differently too, more refined, I suppose. What did she tell you about her family? Nothing, really. She said they were all dead, that she and my father were each other's only family. She died when I was 7, so I don't remember very much. King Marcus turned to one of his advisors, an elderly man with a carefully trimmed beard. Send for Master Aldrich. I want him to examine this necklace and confirm its authenticity. Your Majesty, the advisor said, surely there can be no doubt. The craftsmanship is clearly that of the royal jewelers, and the design. I want to be certain, the king interrupted. Too much depends on this to rely on assumptions. While they waited for the royal jeweler to arrive, the king led Kate to a smaller chamber adjacent to the throne room. It was more intimate than the vast public space, furnished with comfortable chairs and decorated with family portraits. Kate found herself staring at a painting of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to her own reflection in mirrors. That's Isabella, the king said, following her gaze. It was painted for her 18th birthday, just 2 years before she disappeared. Kate studied the portrait with new eyes, looking for signs of herself in the painted features. The woman in the painting had the same dark hair, the same shape of eyes, though her skin was pale from a life lived indoors while Kate's was tanned from working in the marketplace. She looked sad, Kate observed. She was. The engagement to Duke Aldwin had just been announced, and she was not happy about the arrangement. I thought she would come to accept it, as royal children must learn to accept their duties. I was wrong. Prince Alexander had been quietly observing the interaction between Kate and his father. Now he spoke up. Father, if Kate is truly Isabella's daughter, what does this mean for the kingdom? For the succession? The king sank into one of the chairs with a heavy sigh. It means everything becomes more complicated. If Isabella had a child, then that child has a legitimate claim to the throne. The laws are clear on this matter. But I don't want the throne, Kate said quickly. I don't know anything about ruling a kingdom. I'm just a seamstress. King Marcus looked at her with what might have been the beginning of a smile. Do you think any of us are born knowing how to rule? Kingship is learned, child. It's about character, not knowledge. Before Kate could respond, the door opened and Master Aldrich entered. He was an elderly man, bent with age but with eyes that remained sharp and focused. In his hands, he carried a collection of tools and magnifying glasses. Your Majesty, he said, bowing stiffly. I understand you have a piece for me to examine? The king handed him the necklace, and Master Aldrich immediately became absorbed in his work. He examined every detail of the pendant through various lenses, tested the silver for purity, and carefully studied the tiny engravings around the edge. The room was silent except for his occasional murmurs of interest. Finally, he looked up. This is without question the necklace commissioned for Princess Isabella's 16th birthday. I should know, I made it myself. The silver is from the royal mines, the rubies were selected personally by the princess, and the engravings were done by my own hand. There is no possibility that this is a copy or forgery. Kate felt as if the floor was shifting beneath her feet. With those words, Master Aldrich had confirmed what part of her had been afraid to believe. Her mother truly had been a princess, which meant. Then, it's settled, King Marcus said heavily. You are my niece, Kate. You are the daughter of Princess Isabella and, therefore a member of the royal family of Ravenshollow. The words hung in the air like a spell that, once spoken, could never be taken back. Kate looked around the room at the faces watching her, Prince Alexander with his expression of interest and acceptance, Master Aldrich with professional satisfaction at solving a mystery, and King Marcus with a complex mixture of joy and concern. What happens now? Kate asked quietly. Now, the king said, you must learn what it means to be royal. You'll need tutors to teach you history, languages, proper etiquette. You'll need to understand the politics of the kingdom, the relationships with neighboring countries, the needs of the people. And, you'll need appropriate clothing, Prince Alexander added with a slight smile. No offense to your current dress, but it's not quite suitable for court functions. Kate looked down at her simple brown dress and felt a pang of loss for the simplicity it represented. This morning she had put it on without a second thought, just another day in her uncomplicated life. Now it marked her as an outsider in a world she was apparently born to inhabit. There's something else we need to discuss, King Marcus said, his expression growing serious. News of your discovery will spread quickly through the court, and, from there throughout the kingdom. There will be those who welcome you as Isabella's daughter, but others who may see you as a threat to the established order. What kind of threat? Kate asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. A threat to the succession, Prince Alexander answered. There are nobles who have spent years positioning themselves to gain influence with me as the future king. Your sudden appearance as second in line to the throne changes the political landscape considerably. But, I already told you, I don't want to be queen. Can't I just give up my claim? King Marcus shook his head. Royal blood doesn't work that way, child. You can choose not to pursue the throne, but you cannot simply renounce what you are. And there are those who might try to use you for their own purposes, whether you cooperate or not. The weight of what she was hearing settled on Kate's shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had thought the hardest part would be adjusting to palace life and learning royal manners. She hadn't considered that her very existence might make her a target. I need to send word to my father, she said suddenly. He'll be worried sick, and he needs to know what's happened. Of course, the king agreed. But, Kate, you need to understand that he may be in danger as well. If Isabella shared royal secrets with him, if there are those who knew about their marriage. Marriage? Kate interrupted. They were actually married? King Marcus exchanged a glance with Prince Alexander. We don't know for certain. But, if they were, and if there are records of it somewhere, it would make your claim to the throne even stronger. It would also make you an even greater threat to those who prefer the current order of succession. Kate felt overwhelmed by the implications of everything she was learning. Every revelation seemed to create new complications, new dangers she had never imagined. She thought of her father, probably finishing his day's work in his small carpentry shop, unaware that his quiet life was about to be turned upside down as dramatically as hers had been. I need some air, she said, standing abruptly. This is all too much. I can't think clearly. Prince Alexander rose as well. I'll show you to the gardens. They're peaceful, and you'll have privacy to think. As they left the chamber, King Marcus called after them. Kate, I know this is overwhelming. But, I want you to know that whatever challenges lie ahead, you're not facing them alone. Your family, and family protects each other. The gardens were indeed peaceful, a vast expanse of carefully tended flower beds, sculpted hedges, and quiet walking paths. Kate found herself on a marble bench beside a fountain, watching the water dance in the fading light of evening. Prince Alexander sat beside her, respectfully silent as she processed everything that had happened. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you hadn't been born royal?" Kate asked finally. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But, then, I remember that with privilege comes responsibility. I was born to serve the kingdom, to protect and guide our people. It's not always easy, but it gives life meaning." Kate thought about the meaning her life had held just that morning, creating beautiful things with her needle and thread, helping customers look their best for special occasions, the simple satisfaction of honest work well done. It had seemed meaningful then. Now she wondered if she had been living only half a life, unaware of her true purpose. "What if I'm not good enough?" she asked quietly. "What if I can't learn to be what a princess should be?" Prince Alexander turned to look at her directly. "Then, you'll learn. And if you make mistakes, you'll learn from those too. But, Kate, I've been watching you today, and I see qualities in you that can't be taught: kindness, honesty, genuine concern for others. Those are the most important qualifications for royalty." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Kate realized that she had reached a crossroads. She could fight against this new reality, could demand to be returned to Aldermore and her old life. Or she could embrace the destiny that had found her and try to become worthy of the name she had unknowingly carried all her life. The necklace that had started it all lay in her hands now, returned to her by the king as a symbol of her heritage. In the moonlight, the pendant seemed to glow with its own inner light, and Kate thought she could almost hear her mother's voice whispering encouragement across the years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers and political intrigue awaited her, she would face them as Princess Catherine of Ravenshollow, a name she was only just learning to claim as her own. 3 months had passed since that life-changing day in Aldermore's marketplace, and Princess Catherine, as she was now known throughout the kingdom, stood at the window of her chambers watching the sunrise paint the palace gardens in shades of gold and rose. The simple brown dress had long since been replaced by gowns of silk and velvet in the royal colors, and her hair was now styled in the elaborate fashion favored by court ladies. Yet despite the external transformation, she often felt like Kate Mills wearing a costume, playing a role she wasn't sure she could sustain. Her days had become a whirlwind of lessons and responsibilities. Master Geoffrey tutored her in languages, she was making good progress in the formal court tongue and beginning to learn enough of the neighboring kingdom's language to conduct basic diplomacy. Lady Margaret taught her dance, deportment, and the intricate rules of court etiquette that seemed to govern every aspect of royal life. Professor Aldwin instructed her in history and politics, helping her understand the complex relationships that shaped the kingdom's future. But it was the evenings that challenged her most. These were when she attended court functions, navigating the treacherous waters of palace politics while trying to remember which duke was allied with which faction and whose seemingly innocent compliments masked dangerous intentions. Tonight would be the most significant test yet. King Marcus was hosting a grand ball to celebrate the anniversary of his coronation, and every noble family in the kingdom would be in attendance. It would be Catherine's first major public appearance since her identity had been confirmed, and she knew that every eye would be upon her, every word and gesture analyzed for signs of weakness or strength. "Your Highness," came a soft voice from the doorway. Catherine turned to see Alara, the young lady-in-waiting who had become her closest friend and confidant in the palace. "Lady Margaret wishes to begin preparations for this evening's ball." Catherine nodded and allowed herself to be led to the adjoining chamber where a team of servants waited with an elaborate gown of midnight blue silk embroidered with silver stars. The dress was a masterpiece of the royal seamstress's art, but, as Catherine was helped into it, she couldn't help thinking of the simple embroidery work she used to do in Madame Eleanor's shop. Her hands, once calloused from needlework, were now soft from the luxurious life she led. As the servants worked to arrange her hair and apply the subtle cosmetics favored by court ladies, Catherine's thoughts drifted to her father. She had been allowed to send him several letters, and he had responded with his characteristic brevity. He was well, he wrote, and proud of her. The king had sent men to ensure his safety and had provided him with a larger workshop and a house befitting the father of a princess. But Catherine could read between the lines of his careful words. He was struggling with the attention and the dramatic change in his circumstances just as much as she was. There, Lady Margaret announced with satisfaction as the last pin was placed in Catherine's elaborate hairstyle. "You look every inch a princess." Catherine studied herself in the full-length mirror and saw a young woman who bore little resemblance to the seamstress who had worked in Aldermore just months before. The midnight blue gown was stunning, its silver embroidery catching the lamplight with every movement. Around her neck lay her mother's necklace, no longer hidden beneath simple clothing but displayed proudly as a symbol of her heritage. "Are you nervous, Your Highness?" Ilara asked quietly as they made their way toward the grand ballroom. Terrified, Catherine admitted with a slight laugh. "I keep waiting for someone to point at me and declare that I don't belong here." "You belong here as much as anyone," Ilara said firmly. "You're Princess Isabella's daughter. Royal blood flows in your veins regardless of how you were raised." The sound of music drifted through the corridors as they approached the ballroom, along with the murmur of hundreds of conversations and the rustle of silk gowns. Two footmen in elaborate livery opened the doors, revealing a scene of almost overwhelming splendor. The ballroom was a marvel of architecture and artistry, its soaring ceiling painted with scenes from the kingdom's history and supported by columns wrapped in gold leaf. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the assembled nobles, who had clearly spared no expense in their attire for the evening. Ladies swept across the polished floor in gowns that rivaled Catherine's own, their jewelry glittering like stars, while gentlemen in court dress bowed and conversed with practiced ease. "Her Royal Highness, Princess Catherine of Ravenshollow," the herald announced, and Catherine felt every conversation pause as hundreds of pairs of eyes turned toward her. She walked forward with as much grace as she could muster, remembering Lady Margaret's endless lessons about posture and poise. The crowd parted before her, creating a path toward the royal dais where King Marcus and Prince Alexander waited. "You look beautiful, niece," the king said warmly as she approached and offered a perfect curtsy. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Catherine replied, noting how the formal address still felt strange on her tongue when speaking to the man she was beginning to think of as family. Prince Alexander stepped forward and offered his arm. "May I have the honor of the first dance, cousin?" As they took their positions for the opening waltz, Catherine caught glimpses of the faces watching them from around the ballroom. Some expressions were friendly and curious, others calculating or skeptical. She recognized several of the more powerful nobles from her political tutoring: Duke Aldwin, whose daughter had been rumored as a potential bride for Prince Alexander before Catherine's appearance, Lady Beatrice Thornfield, whose family controlled much of the kingdom's trade, and Count Roderick Blackstone, whose loyalty to the crown had always been questioned. "Stop looking so serious," Prince Alexander murmured as they began to dance. "You're doing beautifully." "I feel like I'm being examined under a magnifying glass," Catherine whispered back. "You are. But, remember, they're not just judging you, they're trying to decide how to position themselves in relation to you. Your very presence has changed the power dynamics of the court." As the dance progressed, Catherine began to relax slightly. The steps came naturally, thanks to Lady Margaret's thorough instruction, and she found herself enjoying the music and the elegance of the moment. When the dance ended, she was surrounded by nobles eager to be introduced to the newfound princess. "Your Highness," said a woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, "I am the Countess of Millbrook. I knew your dear mother when she was at court. You have her look about you." "You're very kind," Catherine replied, though she sensed something calculating behind the woman's smile. "Indeed, the resemblance is quite striking," added a younger woman standing nearby. Though one wonders how such resemblance might manifest itself in other ways. Catherine wasn't sure what the woman meant by that, but before she could ask, Prince Alexander appeared at her elbow. "Cousin, I believe Lord Ashford would like to meet you." Lord Ashford proved to be a distinguished gentleman in his 50s with kind eyes and a genuine manner that put Catherine immediately at ease. "Your Highness, it's an honor. I served on your grandfather's council for many years, and I remember Princess Isabella very well. She would be proud to see how you've grown." "Thank you, my lord. I would love to hear more about my mother sometime, if you would be willing to share your memories." "Of course, though I confess most of my memories of her involve her sneaking away from formal events to read in the library or walk in the gardens. She was never truly comfortable with court life." This revelation struck Catherine with unexpected force. She had assumed that her mother's apparent unhappiness had been solely due to her forced engagement. The idea that Princess Isabella might have felt as out of place in palace life as Catherine did now was both comforting and troubling. As the evening progressed, Catherine was introduced to dozens of nobles, each interaction feeling like a small test of her worthiness. Some were genuine in their welcome, others clearly sizing her up for their own purposes. She began to understand what Prince Alexander had meant about people positioning themselves in relation to her power. During a brief respite between dances, Catherine found herself approached by a young man she hadn't met before. He was handsome in a polished way, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothing that spoke of enormous wealth. "Your Highness," he said with an elaborate bow, "I am Lord Sebastian Thornfield. My family controls most of the maritime trade in the eastern provinces. A pleasure to meet you, Lord Sebastian. The pleasure is entirely mine. I wonder if you might honor me with a dance." Catherine glanced around and realized that Prince Alexander was occupied in conversation with several dukes, so she nodded graciously. As they took their positions for a minuet, Lord Sebastian began what seemed like innocent conversation. "You've adapted to court life remarkably quickly, Your Highness. Most people raised outside the palace find the transition challenging." "I've had excellent teachers," Catherine replied carefully. "Of course. Though I imagine there are still aspects of royal responsibility that must seem daunting. The political alliances, the economic considerations, the weight of making decisions that affect thousands of lives." Catherine sensed they were approaching dangerous territory, but wasn't sure how to extract herself gracefully. "I'm still learning, naturally. Naturally. And, of course, you have the advantage of excellent advisors. Your cousin the prince, for instance, has been groomed for leadership his entire life. One might think that the kingdom would be well served by his continued sole claim to succession." The meaning behind his words hit Catherine like a physical blow. He was suggesting that she should renounce her claim to the throne. Before she could formulate a response, a new voice cut into their conversation. "Lord Sebastian," Prince Alexander said coolly, appearing beside them. "I believe my cousin promised me the next dance." "Of course, Your Highness," Lord Sebastian replied smoothly, though Catherine caught a flash of annoyance in his eyes. "Perhaps we might continue our conversation another time, Princess Catherine." As Lord Sebastian melted back into the crowd, Prince Alexander led Catherine to a quieter corner of the ballroom. "What was he saying to you?" Catherine related the conversation, and she saw Prince Alexander's jaw tighten with anger. "The Thornfield family has been positioning themselves as potential power brokers for years," he said. "Lord Sebastian's sister was among the candidates proposed as my bride before you appeared. They see you as a threat to their plans." "Maybe he's right, though," Catherine said quietly. "Maybe the kingdom would be better served if I did renounce my claim. You know this world, these people. I'm still just learning." Prince Alexander turned to face her directly, his expression serious. "Catherine, listen to me carefully. Your claim to the throne isn't just about you, it's about legitimacy, about the proper order of succession that has kept our kingdom stable for centuries. If you renounce your claim under pressure from ambitious nobles, you set a precedent that could destroy the monarchy itself." Before Catherine could respond, a commotion near the ballroom entrance caught their attention. The crowd was parting to admit a late arrival, and Catherine heard murmurs of excitement and surprise rippling through the assembled nobles. "Who is it?" Catherine asked, craning her neck to see. "Duke Aldwin of Northbridge," Prince Alexander replied, his tone carefully neutral. "He rarely attends court functions anymore, not since." He didn't finish the sentence, but Catherine understood. Duke Aldwin was the man her mother had been engaged to marry before she disappeared. His presence here tonight, so soon after Catherine's identity had been revealed, was unlikely to be coincidental. The Duke was a man in his 50s now, with silver hair and bearing that spoke of nobility and military service. As he made his way through the crowd, accepting greetings and acknowledgments, his eyes seemed to be searching for someone specific. When his gaze finally found Catherine, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Catherine saw something flash in his expression: pain, anger, and perhaps recognition of features that must have reminded him of the woman who had humiliated him by disappearing on their wedding day. Duke Aldwin began walking directly toward her, the crowd parting before him like water. Catherine felt her heart begin to race as she realized this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment her identity was confirmed. "Your Highness," the Duke said when he reached her, his bow technically correct but somehow conveying a sense of challenge rather than respect. "Your Grace," Catherine replied, grateful that her voice remained steady. "You look very much like your mother," he said, and the words seemed to carry layers of meaning that Catherine couldn't fully decipher. "So I'm told, Your Grace." Indeed. Isabella was a memorable woman. Beautiful, intelligent, and, ultimately quite, decisive about her choices. The tension in the air was palpable, and Catherine was aware that their entire conversation was being observed and analyzed by every person within earshot. She felt as if she was being tested in some way, but wasn't entirely sure what the correct response should be. "My mother made the choice that led to my existence," Catherine said finally. "I cannot regret that decision, whatever pain it may have caused." Duke Aldwin studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled slightly. "Well said, Your Highness. Your mother's daughter indeed." He bowed again, this time with what seemed like genuine respect. "I hope you will find more happiness in royal life than she did." As the Duke moved away to greet other guests, Catherine felt as if she had passed some crucial test. The conversations around them gradually resumed, though she caught many speculative glances in her direction. "That went better than I expected," Prince Alexander murmured. "What did you expect?" "I wasn't sure. Duke Aldwin has held a grudge against the royal family for 20 years. Your mother's disappearance was a public humiliation for him. But it seems he's chosen to see you as separate from her choices." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dances, conversations, and careful diplomatic maneuvering. Catherine began to understand that every interaction at court was simultaneously social and political, that every smile and compliment might mask calculation or agenda. As the ball began to wind down near midnight, King Marcus approached her with a man she didn't recognize, elderly, with intelligent eyes and clothes that marked him as a scholar rather than a noble. "Catherine, I'd like you to meet Master William, the royal historian. He's been researching your parents' relationship." Master William bowed deeply. "Your Highness, I've made a discovery that I believe you should know about. I found records indicating that Princess Isabella and Thomas Mills were indeed legally married in a small village church outside the kingdom's borders. The ceremony was performed 6 months before you were born." Catherine felt the world shift around her once again. If her parents had been legally married, it meant her claim to the throne was not just legitimate but unassailable. It also meant that the secret her parents had kept was even more significant than she had realized. "This information changes everything," King Marcus said quietly. "You're not just Isabella's daughter, you're the legitimate heir of a legal royal marriage." As the implications of this revelation sank in, Catherine realized that her life had just become even more complicated. There would be those who welcomed this news and others who would see it as a threat to be eliminated. The simple seamstress from Aldermore was gone forever, replaced by a princess whose very existence could reshape the future of the kingdom. Standing in the magnificent ballroom, surrounded by the trappings of power and nobility, Catherine touched her mother's necklace and made a silent promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever enemy she might face, she would honor the legacy of Princess Isabella by becoming worthy of the crown that might one day be hers. The girl who had lost her necklace in a marketplace had found not just her identity, but her destiny. As the last notes of the evening's music faded away, Princess Catherine of Ravenshollow looked toward the future with a mixture of trepidation and determination, knowing that her real journey was only just beginning.